Hi, this is your Cyberpath. We're the podcast that helps you get your dream cybersecurity job. I'm Kip Boyle. I'm here with Wes Schreiner. We are experienced hiring managers of cybersecurity professionals. Welcome to this episode. Hey, you can listen to the episode as an audio only recording in your favorite podcast app. You can also watch us. If you actually want to see what we look like, you can do that too. Just go to our YouTube channel, get up to YouTube and search for your Cyberpath podcast. It'll take you right where we are. So this episode is the next one in a series, right? We're doing this huge series that's designed to tell you all about the way the cybersecurity organizations are put together, what services they perform, and the idea for you is you want to do some career planning. You want to get your dream cybersecurity job. Well, you should probably know what your options are, and as you grow your career, you're going to want to know what those options are as well. So today we're going to drill into one particular service. It's the security policy service. And when we show you the placemat, right, kind of the where are you diagram, that's going to be number 21 in the service catalog. So we're going to do number 21. And as we do, we're going to explore it with a guest. So Wes, will you please introduce our guest, Torin?
Kip, it's good to be here today. We're going to have a lot of fun. I do look forward to taking on the policies and standards of a security organization in a fun and exciting way, because that is sometimes considered a dry subject. So
we're going to liven it up.
You know, that it's going to be a good time. We're going to have a good conversation, and I think it's going to be fun doing it. I'd like to jump ahead here and introduce Torin Larsen. Torin and I have worked together off and on over the last 8-10 years, something like that. He's the managing director at Prescriptive. He delivers security and privacy solutions to businesses all over the Puget Sound and the country. You can find him on LinkedIn, or you can find him kayaking with his kid near Bainbridge Island. So it's a pleasure for me to introduce the guy who has done 100 policy projects around the area, and probably at least one or two for me. So Torin,
and he can still talk about
yourself.
It. Hey, Torin.
Hey, thanks for having me. Yeah, so happy to be here. Appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys and be part of the show. So just a little background on me. As Wes said, I'm a managing director with Prescriptive. I kind of got my start in security at Prescriptive. I had done a variety of different IT jobs before coming here, and you know, I started out doing web development when web pages were less sophisticated than Microsoft Word documents are today. And I'm looking at Kip because I think he probably remembers those times, right?
That's a very accusatory statement, sir.
No, I've been listening to the podcast. I've heard some of your war stories. So
oh yeah. Like the first time I got on the internet, there were 10 web servers. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, doing very sophisticated web dev. It got more sophisticated from there. I've done server administration, network administration, cut my teeth on in a Novell network and NetWare environment back in the day, kind of worked my way through IT to the point that I was running kind of a desktop support function. And then a friend of mine talked me into coming to Prescriptive. Prescriptive was relatively new at the time. It was only about 4 years old. We were founded in 2002, I started doing kind of basic consulting level stuff. We were very much oriented towards Sarbanes-Oxley in the day, because that was the new regulation that had just come out. We had been formed out of Arthur Andersen, which was like one of the big 5 consulting firms back in those days. And we were acquired by Robert Half International, which was the biggest, the largest and oldest staffing firm, I think, in the world. We started as 700 people. I think I was, around maybe person number 1,200 or something like that. We're about 7,000 today. We're in 20 some different countries and fairly big at this point. But I kind of started, I started at Prescriptive, again, through an introduction through a friend. My first project was an SAP project, and I was kind of thinking, I already know all this IT stuff. Like, do I want to start from ground zero on SAP and learn something from the ground up? Like, at this point, that just sounds pretty boring. So I kind of looked at what the options were. I'd always kind of had an interest in security from doing IT work, and Luckily, Prescriptive has a great mentoring program, and I reached out to my mentor and I said, "Hey, I heard about this big project up in Seattle. At the time, I was in LA. I'd love to go do that security project." And lo and behold, 2 projects
You
later,
just wanted out of LA.
that
You just
actually is
wanted
kind
out
of
of
true.
LA.
I am a Pacific Northwesterner. I had been down there for school and started my career down there. Actually, it was being at Protiviti in LA. I don't know if I should say this or not, but doing consulting all over the greater LA basin and starting to have to drive on freeways and stuff was a very different life from just working in IT where you're a mile from home.
So you wanted the next bus out of LA and you got on the cybersecurity bus.
I did actually, and I was lucky enough to get on a project in San Diego, and that kind of pivoted me to I can just be a remote guy, and then I can live in Seattle, and so I managed to get back here kind of quickly, which was
so
nice.
I want to point out 2 things to the audience here about Torin's background, right? First of all, how did he get to Protiviti? He had a friend, right? That's how you get the best jobs, is people and they tap you on the shoulder and say, "What do you think?" Or you call them and you say, "Hey, I'm ready for a new opportunity. Do you know any?" So that's one thing I want to point out. The second thing I want to point out is the pivot.
I'm gonna cut you off and come back to that, Kip. I want to hear your number 2, but it's because you're doing your best work where you're at that someone taps you on your shoulder. You don't get there by being irritated, disgruntled, and why am I stuck in the mail room? No, you're doing what you're doing, and you're doing it to the best of your ability, and that's how you get tapped on the shoulder for the next thing. Back to you, sir.
That's true. That's absolutely true. It's a great caveat. And then the pivot, right? Torin, you pivoted, right? You looked for an opportunity to take a step towards cybersecurity, and you did it. And so I just want to highlight that those are golden things that you should be trying to do. Okay, thanks.
Yeah, no, and so that was 14, 15 years ago. That was my early days in Protiviti, and I've been basically doing cybersecurity ever since. There's been a smattering of other things, but it's been the majority of what I've been doing. My clients, I tend to work in the technology industry, and I was joking with Kip earlier. We tend to have clients that are either gigantic clients that are like $50, $100 billion plus, or we have small startup clients that have nothing in place and need help with everything. And it's funny because we don't have a lot in between. But that's exciting for me, and that's where I spend all my time and loving it still. And consulting's great because it's something different every day, different clients. If you have a bad project, there's always the next project, and it's never too far away. So.
Very cool. Glad to have you here, Torin. I've enjoyed working with you in the past. I wish you a long and successful career in the Great Northwest, where we get to do this again.
Yeah, well, thanks for inviting me.
We're going to jump to get into our topic in just a second, but before we do that, I need to give you the farm story.
Oh yes, yeah. Let's hear what's going on the farm, man. So
life on the farm.
It's spring. It's almost spring, right?
Almost spring. The forsythia have not bloomed. The camellia have not bloomed. It is not quite spring yet on the farm, but we'll get there. What is happening though is it's the start of peacock mating season.
We've heard about the peacocks before.
You're on the edge of your seats worried about this. The peacocks lost all of their feathers in August, September, and now it's February, March timeframe, and those peacocks are growing their feathers back. The males grow the large fan, and the females do not, right? Because the males are out there, attracting mates, right? Peacocks usually throughout the year just scream when they see a predator that they're worried about. But during the months of March, April, May, and sometimes June, they scream to attract a mate. And when I say scream, I mean the screams of a peacock are legendary. If you haven't heard it, look it up. It is the sound of help screamed from a baby. Help!
Blood curdling, right?
And that's the sound that you hear from a peacock. Help! And that is how they attract their mates, right? Well, my neighbors love that. They do. They love it. They think, oh, so sweet. Love is in the air all night long, all day long, every day. So we've had the peacocks a couple of years now, and I want to talk about something that from the farm that applies to work, right? We know that a lot of the metaphors that we gather from the farm are actually true, even though we use them at work and don't remember that there's a lot of grass to mow, there's a fox in the hen house, don't count your chickens before they hatch.
Low-hanging
Those
fruit.
are all truisms from the farm. Well, another one is when you have one neighbor who doesn't like the sound of the peacocks, and that neighbor might go door to door talking to other neighbors about not liking the sound of the peacocks, and gathering a neighborhood support for telling you that he doesn't like the sound of the peacocks, right?
Is there a petition? I want to see a petition.
But then that neighbor then brings you the information, but you're not home, so the neighbor relays it to your wife, who might already be insecure about the sound of the peacocks all the time anyway.
Okay. And this is all hypothetical, right?
Hypothetically.
Totally hypothetical.
That might be a bad situation for you and the peacocks, right? And peahens and pea chicks, right? Future pea chicks. When we're at work and we have to deal with conflict, when we have to have a crucial conversation with somebody, we don't go around and talk to 8 other people before we go talk to the individual. The best way to deal with conflict is to make an appointment with them and say, I'd like to have a hard conversation with you about this topic, so they can come prepared and you can come prepared. You set a neutral space. You have if you need a mediator, you can have a mediator, but oftentimes you can just handle it as with some basic ground rules about how we're going to discuss this tough, hard topic. And then we're going to move on, right? And that's how a crucial conversation can be held. I recommend the book if you haven't read Crucial Conversations. It's a valuable book to have. I also do not recommend going on a podcast to the internet and talking about your neighbor, because that is also not a great way to solve neighbor relationships.
Yeah, but all this grown-up talk about, having crucial conversations, boring. Come on, man.
We do love that neighbor. So yeah, let's move on. We got to jump into security policy, which is the light and life of tonight.
No, man, I just like talking about people behind their back. This seems like the way to go, right?
Don't do
if I've
this,
learned
Kip.
anything from reality TV, that's the way I solve problems.
Are we sure? I am not the neighbor, the person displayed on the screen. It's not the neighbor. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
All right, I guess we should get on with it then, right?
All right, we go. And so a reminder that this is our security placemat. This is the diagram of the 23 common services of a security service catalog. This is the organizational structure of a security org that might include your vice president, your directors, your senior managers in the dark blue, and then your management or individual contributor teams in the light blue. The beige colored numbers are the security services in the service catalog. And today we're taking on policy. That's in the governance and the governance risk and compliance space. And that is the one service we'll be talking about tonight. Let's jump in and see what we got.
Yeah.
We know that policy is the beginning of all security at an organization, but why do we need it? What's there? The business has made a promise that we're going to protect the data entrusted to us. Every CEO says you can trust us with your data, but what are the reasons to protect the data? We do it because we want customer goodwill. We want a competitive advantage. We want strong business partnerships. And we want to meet regulatory and compliance requirements that allow us to continue doing business, right? We'll get into those compliance requirements another day, so I don't want to stay there too long today. Stick around. There'll be another episode on compliance, and that'll be just as fun. All right, types of data we like to protect could be anything on the list there: customer data, employee data, transactional activity, trade secrets, strategic partnerships, pre-release financials. If it's intellectual property of our organization, it falls in the category of cybersecurity to protect it, right? Which brings me to a question. Are we an information security org? Are we a cybersecurity org? I think we used to be called a data assurance organization. What's the right name for a security organization?
Can other
this
people
is
on
where
the
you guys
podcast
go off
talk
mute
about
and you
it?
say interesting things.
Oh, cool. That was the prompt. Okay. Well, I you know what? We lost control of like everything we used to be called. We're now cybersecurity. The media has said so. They've declared it to be it. So I resisted it for years and thought it was just this, silly thing. But now I embrace it. And
When
I'm
you
so
started,
happy.
was it called systems assurance? The
Gosh,
systems assurance team?
it was called data security, I think. It was called or computer security. And then we started lashing the computers together, and then we're like, well, maybe network security. And then
at one point it was
information
just called
assurance.
IT, right? I mean,
Yeah.
there wasn't even, right? Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So yeah, we've had many names over the years, and I've learned not to get too attached to any of them because I never know what's coming next.
I would agree with that. Yeah, I would agree with that. And I don't know what's coming next either. I think, there's a lot of discussion these days about, does cybersecurity, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, is cybersecurity the same function that it is today? Is it something that's more ingrained in the IT organization, the business? Is the CISO a moniker that we're going to have, 5 or 10 years from now? Or is it going to be more holistic from a, chief risk officer standpoint, or a trust officer or something like that?
Maybe everything's just going to be blockchain. I don't know.
Yeah, right. Sure. Yeah. And that'll solve all the problems.
Some people are saying that already, Torin.
Really?
Actually, I believe every new technology that comes out every other year for the last 20 years has always promised it will solve all of the problems.
Yes. So dear watchers and listeners in the audience, this is the thing. So get used to it, right? Everything that comes around the corner is the thing that's going to save us all. So make sure you allocate the vast portion of your budget to it.
Yes.
Write your checks now.
Well, but there's something to that. I mean, you can get a lot more budget. You can get a lot more budget for your zero trust initiative than you can for, your, dinosaur initiative that you were doing 10 years ago, but it's really the same kind of stuff. I mean, there is sales
zero trust. What is
security as well?
Torin, what is zero trust?
No, don't get me started.
Okay, we'll save that for another day.
We have no zero trust
or
here.
Inheriting security controls from any other part of the organization. If you own a piece of data, you protect it at the data layer level, right? You no longer trust that you're inheriting protections from your system or your network or your environment, your external shell, any of that.
Yeah, and it incorporates things that we've talked about for years. Assume breach, right? And the internal network is not to be trusted, right? That's a lot of organizations have been talking about for years. But packaging it and branding it, zero trust has a lot of new things too. But packaging and branding it does help in some ways if you're trying to sell your biggest budget.
It does. So have you guys been in an organization with real clarity about what they want to protect? Or maybe an organization with not a lot of clarity, a lot of ambiguity about what they should be protecting? And what did that look like or feel like?
It's easy to protect. I guess I can say yes, because there are some organizations that have a very straightforward, simple environment that you only have one set of data you care about. Say your employee social security numbers, and that's really all you have to worry about. And that's in some ways a luxury. And if everything else is public, then there's no reason to worry about it. Few organizations have it that simple, right? So it's usually the opposite end of that particular spectrum. And you may not have good data classification. You may not have good understanding of what data you have. You oftentimes you want the business to be the ones making decisions about data and being the ones that take ownership of that data. But oftentimes they haven't thought the entire process through, and they haven't thought about what happens if, my customer sales history, goes out. They're focused on the credit card numbers and, that kind of stuff, but they haven't thought through all the other data that they have. So,
I was at one organization as a consultant one time that actually had real clarity. Their DLP tool, their data loss prevention tool, was primarily focused on their unreleased coupon book. Like literally, the whole DLP was around make sure that coupon book doesn't go out before it goes out. And they used their DLP for that purpose alone, and that cost justified it, and it was worth protecting. And it was. It's
a digital asset, right? I mean, I think in terms of digital assets, Torin, you work with very, very large enterprises. I work with mid-sized companies mostly, and also some startups like you do. And I have to talk to them about a whole gamut of digital assets, including money. Like, do you have two-factor authentication turned on for your bank account? What about QuickBooks or whatever, your accounting packages, whatever. So it's not just data. I just think of it as digital assets, whatever those things might be.
Nice.
Absolutely. And the big companies have the same problems, honestly. And when you look at new vectors for social engineering attacks and things like that, it's the same playbook, regardless of the size.
So now we've got to transition. We know that we have data we want to protect, but we've got to figure out how we as an organization, as an enterprise, are going to protect that data. We've got to build consensus across the organization to protect that data. And we've got to do it in a way that's signed off by our officers and executed in every design decision we do along the way. How are we going to do that? Maybe we should have a security policy. Yep, got my slide right there. On the left-hand side of this diagram is what everybody thinks security policies and standards are, right? You've got documents that turn into requirements, that turn into operations. It's a 3-box setup. It can't be that hard. You guys, I do that in my sleep. It's 3 boxes. The only thing that diagram missing is beer cans and lightning bolts, but we can do that another day. That's how we do network diagrams anyway. We'll get there another day. But on the right-hand side of this page is actually the same diagram in greater detail, as if you were a policy administrator trying to track the organizational security policy from the written word of my board of directors all the way down to what it looks like in ongoing operations in my production environment. Right?
Yeah, this is inside baseball.
It is. And this is Moneyball coming at you. This is all about what is my organizational security policy? What do those standards look like? What is prescriptive guidance? And then how do I deliver requirements or user stories, right? Which is actually the interesting way to go these days, because our development teams are using user stories and we probably want to speak their language, right? If we're going to drive requirements into their world, we probably need to do it in a language they understand. And that's going to include implementation guidance, acceptance criteria, and even the test cases that we want to use to demonstrate that feature was enabled in the software as we asked for, right? Then we're going to do some risk management for things that didn't quite make it. We're going to do some traceability and accountability along the way, and we're going to see it in production, and that's going to be a beautiful thing. It's a lot of fun in a software team to see what you've done on the internet or in the world, right?
Now, Torin's here to keep us honest, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I've been watching his face. He hates this slide. Do you hate this slide? Or is it just mild? Is it mild disgust? I'm really trying to zero in.
I don't use the slide. I'm thinking about what Wes wants me to say when, but
just follow
don't hate
the
player,
script.
hate the slide, man.
Yeah, no. I think we'll probably talk about this later, but I do really think there is a distinction between policies and standards, and as well as procedures, the prescriptive guidance. I will say one thing I don't like about it. I don't like the word guidance anywhere near a policy. I want that to just guidance can be a lot of different things, but I very much prefer procedure or things like that. And
maybe prescriptive light, prescriptive path for the enlightened. Maybe we go with something like that, right?
Sure. Guidance is just one of these things that people look at and they're like, the guidance takes the prescriptive away, right? Oh, it's prescriptive, but it's only guidance, right? So it's just a term that I've never particularly liked.
It's always set me up for failure.
What's that?
Too soft of a word or too hard of a word?
They're contradicting.
Yeah, as you say right here, policies need to be management's leadership's assertion of what is expected for people to do. You can't really expect people to patch their servers within X number of days if you haven't written that down, because then they're going to say, oh, I didn't get to it. It's like, you got to point to something and say, well, it said so right there, and this whole committee signed off on that. And so it is literally the definition of what you have to do, and if you aren't doing it, then you're not compliant and you're not doing your job, right? And so when you again, guidance, I think it can be good in some situations where it's like, well, how do I do this? That's great. Implementation guidance, I think, is good if you're giving them a set of choices. But I would almost put that off to the side. And because right now it's sitting between standards and requirements. And for me, guidance is more like this, like helpful assistance that's not required. And requirements are required because they're called requirements, right? And standards are required because they're called, so anyways. Would you disagree?
The smear of the prescriptive guidance. I love it, right? We're going to have a whole slide on that later. So let's get there. That's going to be a lot of fun. I think you called out a couple things that are worth calling out here, right? One of the common pitfalls is when you write security standards in a vacuum, right? That can be a real problem. Another one is when you write requirements for a project and you throw them over the wall to the project team and say, do something with this, right? And if you send over a long document with a lot of written word requirements that aren't specific to the project or the development build that's being created, that's not going to go in files 1 through 12. That's going to go in file 13, the round one down next to the desk, right? That's where that's going to go, right? So we've got to get to a place where our requirements are relevant, speaking the developers, the builders' language.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so let's jump ahead and we'll see if we can jump right into, oh, sorry, missed a slide. This is the slide that tells us we're only taking on the top 4 items today. We're going to take on policies, standards, guidance, and requirements. The reason for that is because those are the 4 areas that are actually done by the policy administrator. The rest of this diagram is part of the life cycle, but they're done at different stages of the service catalog by different participants in the security organization. And so we're only going to cover these top 4 because that's what your policy administrator and the policy service is all about.
Props to your quote. Bruce Schneier.
Go
Love
ahead.
It. Yeah, well, I just want to affirm that, we talk about technology all the time. Technology's kind of gotten us into the situation that we're in, and we're just looking for the next big blockchain, Bitcoin gizmo to get us out of our problems. And that's just false thinking. So I just love this quote. I'm really glad you put it down in here. When I talk to CEOs and CFOs, they don't understand technology anyway. And what I'm telling them is, it's like, look, you got technology as a resource, but you got people, you got process, and you got your own management team. Those are excellent resources, and you should be tapping all of them and orchestrating them all to make sure that your digital assets are safe.
Absolutely.
Nice. And our quote for those who are following along at home is from Bruce Schneier that says, if you think technology can solve your security problems, then you don't understand the problems and you don't understand the technology.
It's a good one.
Yeah. Thanks all. All right. Should we call it a podcast?
Oh yeah, that's it. We're out of here.
We got more good stuff. Let's take it on and see what we got. Introducing the security policy, right? If we want to understand a little bit about the security policy, it's going to guide all future security decisions made within the organization. It's an agreement that the board makes with its customers, shareholders, stakeholders, that this is what our promise is for how we're going to treat your data, how we're going to treat the things that you've entrusted to us, the assets that we're accountable for. Once the board makes that commitment, that's a public promise that is made. And all the rest of this is working out that promise in our everyday decisions in our organization. I pulled an actual copy of a security policy for encryption. So 800, use of encryption. Cryptographic controls must be used and implemented as per classification and encryption standards. All cryptographic keys must be protected against unauthorized access, modification, loss, and destruction. That is 2 sentences, my friends, about encryption, and that is the entirety of the security policy mentioning encryption. There's nothing more. Usually the security policy is about a 2-page document, maybe 3, with some extra fluff and signatures at the end. And its entire purpose is to set standards, set policy for each one of these areas. Anything you guys want to add to that before we jump into the working out of that policy in the standards?
Yeah, I mean, this can take a lot of different forms. When we say security policy, oftentimes that can mean security policies. It can mean a policy set. It can mean an entire organizational chart of security policies, right? So it doesn't have to be just one. I've seen a security program that's like the written information security program, which is something that's referenced by some regulations, and that governs what different policies are. I've seen things where it's tier 1, tier 2 that defines those types of things. Different organizations do them differently, but I think that the thing that I would say I've seen work versus not work is kind of, as you referred to, Wes, the smaller and the more straightforward the policy, the easier it's going to be to manage in the long term. I've walked into clients where they handed me a 55-page security policy, and it's, it covers everything, right? And it's like, okay, when
Is
was
that
the last
policies
time?
and standards?
Yeah, usually if it's 55 pages, it usually
Yeah.
has a mix of both, right? And it's like, when was the last time anyone reviewed and reapproved this? And it was like, well, probably when we bought it off the shelf 5 years ago, right?
Yeah.
Because you can't. The thing about policies is, and the way that I divide up usually security policies and security standards is, I like to think of the security policy level statements as the thing that everyone can get on board with. You can put it from the CEO, and the CEO is going to say that makes sense, right?
Yeah, we do that.
And it's funny because I use the same example that you put right here. When I'm explaining to someone for the first time how you do security policies, I say a security policy statement is sensitive data should be encrypted, must be encrypted, right? And then what is sensitive data? What is encryption, right? Well, you go to your standards to define what those things are. How often do you need to make a change to the statement sensitive data must be encrypted? Not very often. We're going to agree with that,
Right.
most of the time, right?
Definitely.
So the policy statements, I like to say, are the who and the what. So it's assigning responsibility oftentimes for so-and-so shall be responsible for this. And then the standards are more the what and who and the what and the why, and the who and the how. The what and the why, WW, and the who and the how, which is sort of HH. Anyways, and so you can tell, yeah. So
it is late, my friends. The sun has gone down, and Torin is a little loopy.
He's a little punch drunk.
So anyways, no. The difference, though, again, is those high level statements are things that you can get a C-level executive on board with. It's going to make sense to them. They're going to agree with it, and you're not going to have to change it very often. The standard statements are the things that are going to get a little more technical. What kind of encryption do we want to have? What is, I know I'm previewing your next slide, Wes, but what is WEP, right? You're not going to have, a CEO is not going to say whether or not you can use WEP, right? But an encryption standard is going to have to go through what is the acceptable types of encryption and what are the unacceptable types.
And you don't want that stuff in your policy because it changes.
It changes, exactly. It changes more often, and the audience is going to be different, and the people who are going to approve that is going to be different as well.
And that policy is signed off at the board level, whereas standards are not. They're a much more localized approval.
Mm-hmm.
If you're lucky, right? I mean, so at the board level, so oftentimes what you have is you have a charter at the board level, and the charter says these people are chartered to do security, and and they have ultimate responsibility for security across the organization. I don't care if you're a product group, I don't care if you're an IT group, I don't care if you're a business group. That's Wes, and he's in charge of that. No debate. You're done, right? And the board says that. And Wes can go walk around the organization, wave that charter in people's faces, and say, the board told me I could do this.
And that's always been effective in my career, right? Usually waving charters is the most effective way to win friends, influence people, and create change from the middle or on the top in an organization.
And have people throw parties in your name.
Oh my.
Yeah.
You know it. Yeah. So
I just want to add one thing, if I may. Is that I think of, first of all, I love the way you've explained it, and I'm totally on board with that. When I talk to my customers, sometimes they say, like, policies are just kind of like, they're like, we don't want them. They get in the way, right? We just want to do our job. We don't want to be overly formal, right? And God, just the whole idea of policies just makes me shiver, because it makes me think of the Department of Motor Vehicles or whatever. And so, no, we're not going to do policies, right? Everybody knows what to do. And, and so I have to tell them that, policies don't have to be like that. If you want to write a big, thick policy set and wave it at the auditors, like, garlic to a vampire, and make them go away, Sure, I see people do that all the time, but you've managed no real risk. So I like to show them how they can actually create a policy that is flexible and useful. And really what I tell them is, I said, look, you need some guardrails. You need some nice sturdy guardrails because you're driving on a twisty mountain road. You need some guardrails.
So I'm gonna pick up from there, Kip. Thank you. That was thoughtful. We have used the term policy in two different definitions. One is the policy of the small document signed off by the executive.
Mhm.
And then the other definition is the royal policy that includes all policy standards, guidance, and anything else that's related to the policy infrastructure. And so let's keep that in mind as we go forward. We're using it both ways interchangeably, and it's up to you, the listener, to guess which one we're implying at the time.
We have overloaded terms. That never happens in security.
Should be fun.
Oh, I'm so sorry, everybody.
So let's keep going. We have now established a policy. We need to work out that policy. Remember, this was policy number 800, the use of encryption. Now we're looking at security standards, and we have a document number 810, 820, or 801, whatever you want to call it. And this is a multi-page document that describes all of the workings out of our encryption expectations in our organization. This may have 10 bullets, or it may have 200 bullets of those encryption expectations. One of those bullets might be confidential and restricted data must be encrypted while in transit within the organization's networks and when transferred externally. Right? The data classification standard would probably take us into greater detail as to which kind of data is required to be handled in which way. But for the cryptography standard, this is a reasonable statement to expect. I want to call out a couple caveats in writing a security standard. The first is the Moscow method. Moscow is an acronym for must, should, could, and won't. Your policy statements usually have one of those four words. Your standard statements usually have one of those four words leading off, right? Data must be encrypted, data should be encrypted, data could be encrypted, or data won't be encrypted. The other thing I want to call out on standard statements is they must be operational, not aspirational. If we are writing an aspirational standards, we are telling our auditors, we're telling our stakeholders, this is what we do, and what we mean is, this is what we'd really like to do. Why don't you check our work and see that we're not doing it? Never do that, friends.
Gun, meat, foot.
Yeah, right. That doesn't end well, right? No. Those policies and standard statements, though, are also the working out of our agreement as a security team with our technology team, that this is how we're going to secure each of the assets in that technology space. And the value in that is, once we've reached that agreement and managed that expectation, we can hold each other accountable to that. And that's where we get into that risk register, and we start recording violations of our own policies and standards we've all agreed to as the risk register, so that we can manage risk inside our organization.
I would add, that goes back to your comment earlier, Kip, about, IT policies saying, or IT people saying that policies make them skittish and stuff like that. Wes is exactly right. It's, it is.
Quote that. Can we get that in repeat mode?
I'm going to excerpt that little bit right there, and I'm going to put it on YouTube as a highlight of the podcast.
All 17 listeners. Did you listen to it?
We're going to get 19 for that for sure.
Because your mom and my mom are listening. I love it.
But it's true. When you set something in a policy, the person who has to implement that policy should have the opportunity to say, that's not possible. We've got a 30-year-old mainframe and you can't do that there, right? And there should be an opportunity to have a back and forth to say, we're setting this policy, oops, it's not going to work here. What are we going to do about that? And if you don't have that back and forth, if you don't have that agreement that Wes is talking about, then IT and security and all the different constituents are going to be on different pages about what we can do, how we build a system, how we manage a system.
And then you're going to have angry peacock neighbors.
And when something goes wrong, guess what's going to happen, right? I mean, all hell's going to break loose, and we're going to find that, everyone's pointing this way because no one actually was in agreement on how something should be done.
Wow. And there we go. We can end there. No, we can't. There's more to do.
Jump ahead.
if we've got an aspirational policy and we want to include it still, we can set an as of date. We can set a date 6, 12, or 18 months into the future and say, we intend to, we shall, not we must, but we shall achieve this standard of security or quality of service as of this date.
And
so that's one way to handle it.
You can essentially phase it in too. All new systems shall have this feature by this date. All legacy systems shall have this feature by that date, right? And give yourself more time to deal with it. And then there's also other things that come into it. No policy structure is worth anything if it doesn't have an exception process, right? So, you've got to have a process to identify, manage, accept risks as part of an acceptance process or an exception process. And
please don't call it an exception process.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Please. They're not risk exceptions.
I've always called it. What's that?
We don't accept. We can accept risk.
Yes.
But
I spoke wrong. Sorry. The policy exception must have a risk acceptance process. Right? Did I get that right?
Well done, sir.
Sandy sells shells by the seashore.
Yeah, exactly.
Yes. It's late for Kip. We're after his bedtime. This is going to be a good second half.
Oh, for sure.
Podcast.
For sure, it's after my bedtime. Keep going.
Oh, yeah. All right. So I got a special guest speaker for us today. Let's see if he can tell us something.
Why would you put a procedure about managing firewalls inside your user access control policy? Why? Make your auditors happy. Make sure your documentation is organized.
He dresses like all the auditors I see.
So Kip, be nice to him. He's my actual auditor right now on an existing audit. So be nice to him, please.
Justin, I really appreciate that you made a drop-in appearance, man.
Isn't that
I'm going to buy you. Yeah, I'm going to buy you a beer. This is great.
I'm hoping Justin, the angry auditor, drops in again for us on other topics because he's got a lot of good stuff to say.
I think we could convince him to do it.
So when we talked about one security standard, the encryption security standard, and we called it number 800. Well, there's actually 20 common security standards that you might see in your enterprise. And here's a list of many of the common security standards. NIST offers more detail and specific standard templates that you can start building from. These are just some expectations for what you might see in a security standard library. I want to call out that I want to call out a couple examples, right? The identity standard likely includes both standard and privileged user expectations. It probably has access definitions for both premise and cloud applications, and it likely includes standards for both interactive and non-interactive accounts, right? The risk management standard likely has the agreed upon risk criteria that will be applied to any security risk findings and what level of the organization can accept what type of risk, right? If we have a well-organized security standards, then Justin the auditor is going to be happy. Never happy. He's Justin the angry auditor. But we're also going to be able to update, maintain, and find the standards when we need them in our organization. So structuring your standards in a way that you can look it up again later is excellent and a good practice to follow.
Which of these would you wager you spend the most time on?
Updating or the most time on referencing?
From the if you're drafting it from the beginning.
I think you could tell us that better than I could. I spend a lot of time hitting the data classification and handling because a lot of what I do is consulting inside the organization about, well, what kind of data are you manipulating and where do you want to send that? Are you sure you want to do that? You want to send customer data over the internet? Should we talk about that? Right? Yeah.
I think it's a trick question.
No,
I think Torin just asked a trick question because
only in this at the very top of the list. Go ahead, Kip. Sorry, you were going to say something.
Yeah. No, I was going to say it's a trick question because nobody in their right mind writes a policy from scratch. We shamelessly steal, borrow, plagiarize. Nobody starts from scratch. Charles Cresson Wood made an entire career out of giving us a whole thick book of cribs. Did you ever look at that? Security Policies Made Easy?
I've never used that. No.
It's like
No.
an 800-page book full of stock security policy statements that you can just thumb through and pull out the ones you like, man.
Even if you do that, I guarantee you will, if you have anyone paying attention, you will spend all your the most amount of time on the acceptable use standard, because of these, it's the only one that is facing every employee in the organization. All the rest of these here and all the other ones that aren't listed here are going to be ones that different people in IT are going to grab for different purposes. Obviously, the auditors are going to grab them and stuff like that. But the acceptable use policy, in my experience, is always the most contentious, because that's the one that you attach to the security awareness training and they have to sign their name on it. And that is the one that HR is going to want to thumb through, in every little last bit of detail. And there's always, there's always some wrinkle to every little thing that's in there. So
I so agree with you. I so agree with this point. And the HR angle is particularly relevant, because as a manager, if I'm going to hold somebody accountable because they violated the acceptable use standard, then that means I'm going to HR and I'm invoking the disciplinary process, whatever that looks like. And I'm getting support from the human resources department for, holding somebody accountable for what they've done. So yeah.
Generally legal wants to see it too. I mean,
Yep.
It's and the other thing that I didn't say before when we were talking about the difference between the audiences for policies and standards, if you're implementing a program like this for the first time, one of the other reasons that you do policies at a high level and then you do standards kind of later at a lower level is that generally by the time you've gotten through the policies, all the executives who thought they were going to be super involved are really tired of it at that point. And then when you move on to the standards, they don't even fight about it. They're like, oh, okay, that's a different level of authority. Okay, sounds good. I'm glad to be done, right? But again, they'll be all over that acceptable use standard. And so if it's a policy, oftentimes it's called an acceptable use policy. It depends on what you want to do. But no matter what, you can't bury that one in a standard. It will be something that everyone's going to want to be involved in.
Nice. All right, so we're going to take that standard and we're going to jump into Torin's favorite topic, prescriptive guidance. Right? You can also call it hardening guidelines. You can call it security procedures. You can call it detailed requirements. These are implementation and changes to how do you deploy in our environment, right? This might actually be, here is the requirements for what should go in my chef puppet recipe. Pick your chef, pick your puppet, pick your automation tool for how I'm going to build my environment out and set my gold standard for server builds.
I would argue, Wes, at least in my experience, that the example here, I mean, I think it's okay when we're saying like PEEP or EAP-TLS, that's okay. But I would argue that some of this really should be in a standard instead. Again, in prescriptive guidance, I don't feel like people are going to be, so again, WEP must not be used for any wireless encryption, right? For me, that's not guidance. That's something that you need to lay down in the standard because people won't take it seriously in prescriptive guidance. And that's true. That's where I have the issue with the term, right? Is guidance doesn't sound like, so I was like, oh, well, the guidance told me I shouldn't use WEP, but I'm going to do it anyways because I'm a total idiot.
Outstanding. So I'm not going to disagree with you. I'm going to say that policy is signed off at the board. Standards are signed off at the executive level inside the company. Guidance is signed off by some manager in building 3, right? Guidance can be written by anyone and recorded and changed on the fly with very little administrative overhead. And so because of that, it may be that we get statements that are standards-based statements appearing in our guidance as well.
And so as an example, again, I'm really talking about this specific issue on this specific example, but like, for example, I would be, when it comes to hardening standards, right? I mean, I would typically have a policy, I would have a policy standard or a policy that says, all systems must be hardened according to industry guidance, right? And maybe defines what that means or something. But like in the standard, I would have something that says, you know, there shall be secure configuration procedures, prescriptive guidance, whatever you want to call it. And those procedures must be based on either CIS or NIST, right? Or, you know, and then every procedure must use that as a baseline, and there must be traceability between, you know, between the CIS or NIST standard and what we chose to implement from that standard versus what we chose not to, right? And then you can hand it off to a procedure, and you can have Joe Manager approve that procedure. And again, that will change frequently, right? New ones will be added frequently, but I guess, and you know, I've seen PCI auditors harp on WEP a lot and stuff too. So that's where this example, I feel like some of that would be helpful to have at the standard level. So it'd be a little more mandatory. Would you disagree?
I would not, and I'll buy that for $1. And then I will say the easy button for prescriptive guidance is look at, you already alluded to it, the NIST standards, right? We can go grab the STIGs, which is the Security Technical Implementation Guides that the US government publishes for many platforms that are available in the marketplace today, literally telling you this is how, if you're going to do business with the US government, we want it configured to be configured securely. We can apply those in our environment as well. We can grab the STIG. It's free and fully available to you.
Yeah,
So
and if you're studying computer security and you're trying to understand like what are the various settings that are available, that are possible, that are actually, you know, recommended to be turned on, just go start reading these things. I mean, just go grab them and start going through them. They are wildly educational. They're not fun to read, right? I mean, I'm not saying that it's fun, but it can really help you understand like what's the landscape on all these technologies.
If you thought we were putting you to sleep, those STIGs are going to be awesome for you.
I was like reading the encyclopedia. I'm not saying it's fun from cover to cover, right?
All right.
Well, I guess we don't have those anymore. Dang.
So
Need a new metaphor.
If I can diverge to a side note right now, since we're just talking about this, I just wrapped up this project where we are doing these assessments of manufacturing organizations in Asia. And a lot of them have, you know, a basic IT function, but really nobody has any concept of security. And one of the things we're asking about is hardening. And a lot of them will say, you know, we'll ask the question, you know, are you doing system hardening, right? And they will say, yes, we are. And we're like, okay, the question I like to ask is, okay, how long is your hardening procedure for a given platform? And they'll say 2 pages. And I'm like, nope, you're not doing hardening. Like, you know, go here, I will send you a link. This document is 130 pages long. You know, this is what hardening is, right?
You're just using a big font. I know you. This is just tricky.
Yeah. Nice. All right. So, and that brings us to the bottom of introducing policy, standards, and guidance. To wrap up and really drain everything, all the goodness out of the security policy services of the service catalog, we're going to jump into what is the inputs, processes, and outputs we might expect in a policy administration process, right? And we start with who are our suppliers? Our suppliers could be our development teams. It could be our infrastructure teams. It could be our own business teams. It could be our executive management. It could be our board. Suppliers for what policy we should have can come from anywhere, and they feed into the policy backlog. As I was brainstorming at midnight last night, some of those policy backlog items might come from new technologies or new solutions. It might be a new threat or a new vulnerability come up in the marketplace. A new policy backlog item might come from a miscommunication or an argument in the organization, right? If your peacocks are making too much noise, there might be a long discussion that turns into we need to codify this discussion with a policy statement so we don't have to argue about it in the future, right? Other places policies and standards come from is arguments about what is right, or even better, great ideas from management. So those are the places we see policy backlog come from. The policy administrator takes all of that backlog, incorporates it into draft documents. Notice I didn't say the policy administrator brainstormed all of these things. They collected them and they built consensus, and then they created drafts that then could be reviewed by various parties. They track those draft reviews and then deliver them as final reviews for sign off, right? If we think about a SIPOC is the suppliers, inputs, processes, outputs, and customers. Who are the customers of this is actually the same group that was the suppliers. It's almost a dynamic circle of codifying how we are going to do business and then doing business that way. If you're interested more in the SIPOC process, it's a Six Sigma or a lean term if you're going to go deeper into total quality management. All right, anything you guys want to add here?
Wes, I thought of another one, and more common at larger organizations, which is reorgs.
Tell me.
No, reorgs. I mean, when an organization reorgs, all the again, what I talked about, the who and the how all changes, right? And you have to reassign who does what and, to what level they do. And, oh, this other organization did it differently and all that kind of stuff. And, there's policy implications for all that type of thing. And sometimes there's total teardowns involved.
So what kind of gotchas do you see in this policy administration process, right? Torin, you have written or supported 100 different policies in the greater Puget Sound. What gotchas do you run into?
Well, I don't know if there's 100 different organizations, but I've supported a lot. I think again, most of what I've done has been standing it up from scratch, right? So the gotchas are usually around how do we do this, right? And it's the chicken or the egg argument, right? Like, do you write the policy the way it should be, or do you write the policy so loose that it doesn't have any meaning or value to it, right? If you write the policy to be, we're talking about the whole aspirational thing, right? Like if you're writing the policy to reflect how it is today, in a lot of cases for a lot of organizations, that's a pretty worthless policy, right? If you don't have policies to begin with, chances are you also have a lot of other gaps, and you don't want to write all those gaps into your policies, right? So yeah, so and then there's to be honest with you, these projects end up being really challenging because there's a lot of negotiation involved, and there's a lot of is this even your job? You're not allowed to do that. You can't, we can't do that. That's going to take $5 million, and those types of things. And as we talked about earlier, a lot of that becomes a negotiation over implementation timeframes, the difference between new systems and legacy systems. Okay, there's an exception process. You can follow the exception process. Oh no, I'm sorry, you can't approve your own exception. We're going to have to approve that for you. And there's also a lot of education involved. There's a lot of hand-holding. There's a lot of, we've never done this before. What are you talking about? And then you bring in regulations to it. And there's a lot of, okay, we have to do ISO and HIPAA and SOC 2 and, government.
PCI and GLBA.
Yes, exactly.
You had a slide on that.
Earlier, yeah. And so there's different constituencies involved in that oftentimes, and they will have it out as far as what they need versus what other people need versus what other people don't want to have to do, right? And so there's a huge amount of this. Everything in the slides here that we've talked about feels very quantitative and very black and white. And in actuality, when you go and implement a whole policy program for an organization, it is nothing but qualitative. It's all, negotiation, hand-holding, arbitration of points of view, and all that kind of stuff. If anyone's paying attention. If nobody's paying attention, then it actually goes really smoothly, and you just write all the policies, they click approve, and you're good, right? But if anyone's actually paying attention, it is a very, thorough and painstaking exercise.
If no one's paying attention, what you've just done is created auditor be gone.
Yeah.
Yep, that's nice. All you've done. You've just.
But then there's a danger in that because it's probably not accurate, and
right.
And people probably aren't going to pay attention to it. So and down the road they're going to implement things that don't conform with policy, and the auditors are going to find that, and
So I'm glad we kept going earlier because I think the last 2 minutes was the most important part of this episode, and I'm really looking forward to capturing that in this next slide here that talks about what are we looking for when we talk about the roles inside the policy administration service? There's really only one role. It's the policy administrator or team of policy administrators. That can be a junior person, a senior person, or it can be a principal level contributor, right? This is very much a business skill service. This is all about technical writing, building consensus, and creating it and following attention to detail. We just heard Torin describe that job in the greatest detail I've ever heard anyone describe it. And I thought it was phenomenal. I hope you rewind and listen to him again on that part. The most common tools used here are Outlook, SharePoint, and Word, right? We're doing change tracking and we're doing notes. This is a business job inside security that is absolutely critical to security. And you don't have to speak DOS.
Yeah. And maybe there's a GRC tool in here you have to use too, right?
You could end up loading your policy statements into the GRC tool as part of the integrated.
But it's not that complicated. It's not that tough.
No, well, but I think on the size of your organization, there can be payoffs to that. So like Wes and I worked on a project where, we after some work to get things aligned and rationalized and stuff like that, we basically created a system by which from the project intake process, when a project was being, first in the concept phase, it could be intaked into a system based on a questionnaire and a set of criteria and stuff that would take the policy statements. Those would boil down into standard statements, would boil down into security requirements. The security requirements would be matched to the project profile based on the answers to the questionnaire. And then that flowed into, on that chart that Wes had before, that flows into user stories, which then flow into test requirements, which then flow into testing results, right? And for a large organization that does a huge amount, that has hundreds and hundreds of software developers doing a huge amount of software development, that can have enormous benefits in terms of ensuring the security action, that ensuring the policy intentions make their way into the end product. Again, ultimately making your system secure, passing those audits, all those kinds of things, all that good stuff, right? But I mean, that's, you say a GRC tool. I mean, that was something, I mean, Wes, we were developing, I think we developed 5 different microservices that integrated, the profiling app with the, the GRC app with the testing app, the test requirements repository and like all those types of things, right? So you can get very complex here and there's a payoff to it, even with all that effort.
But I wouldn't expect any common policy administrator to be at that level. That was a phenomenal and very fun project. I think we should bring that forward to this conversation someday in the future. We should have written the white paper then, but we'll write it now, right? And it'll be fun. It was a really cool project of creating security user stories early on when security user stories didn't exist yet, right? So that was really fun.
Right.
When I think about this policy administrator, right? It's often a role that is not pursued in the security organization. It is rarely one that people transfer into by choice, right? Sometimes we find ourselves there. It's the last person left, I ended up helping with it, and now it's my job, right? And sometimes that's how it works out. But I would call out that I think there are whole careers that can be made around a person who embraces policy administration and becomes the policy administrator for an organization or for several organizations. And it's a powerful and strong and healthy career to have.
And I think those roles also oftentimes, I think one of the things that might appeal about that type of role is that oftentimes that person is also responsible for shepherding through, again, the exception process, right? And the risk acceptance process, and that actually can mean, someone who's relatively in the weeds on policies and maybe early in their career might get a lot of executive focus where, if you have the right skill set to be able to explain to an executive what the gap is, what the associated risk is, what we're doing about it, what the residual risk is, and should, given all that stuff, do you want to approve this? That role has a nice, executive exposure that I think is going to be appealing to some people. You also, I've seen that role also have a piece of, managing a steering committee. If you've got a security steering committee or a policy committee or things like that, that person might be the person who coordinates those things and coordinates, those meetings and the discussion of risk and all those kinds of things. Again, lots of nice executive exposure as part of that.
Yeah. And you're going to build some really good mental models for how this stuff really works, which you can then take with you, if you're going to move on to another assignment in another part of the org.
And that's what a lot of people do. But my call out is actually, this could be a career opportunity, right?
Yep.
It's possible to make an entire career out of this and have a great 9-to-5 business job opportunity and be excellent at it and actually sell those services to more than one company.
Yep,
right?
Definitely. Now, Wes,
you can do it straight out of school.
I know the guest gets the last word. But
I
want to say something before the last word.
All right.
Okay. So you had asked Torin a moment ago about like what's the hardest part, I think, right, of all of this. And from my point of view, as a CISO, the hardest part is operationalizing it.
Yes. Absolutely.
If it's not well written, I can't operationalize it, and it means nothing.
Yep.
And then you have Justin, the angry auditor. We don't want that.
Right.
Well, and a tangent to that too is edge cases, right? I mean, the operationalization of it is always the challenge. Is always an 80-20 type thing. It's pretty straightforward for your core systems. It's the edge cases that kill you.
And that's why you need an exception process.
Yep.
Outstanding.
Okay.
All right.
Let's do it. Let's keep going.
So I'd love to give Torin the microphone. Tell us, Torin, what have been the keys to your success in your career?
So I thought this was funny because I mean, I appreciate it. I guess there's an implicit, like, I've been successful in that question. So thanks.
Go with it.
The fact that you're here, we declare you successful.
Thanks.
I respect you, man. You got this.
So I mean, like, I think I've to some extent stood on the shoulders of others, as they say, or I think, there's no one person who can know everything about security, right? And so, like, there's too much out there to know. You're never going to be a specialist in everything, right? So I think, the keys to my success have been, the people that I've been able to partner with, the people, on my team, the partners, the great clients that I've been able to partner with and stuff like that. The relationships that we've had, the resources of, a network and a community to be able to go out. I mean, I don't take credit for any of my own knowledge. What I might take credit for would be, my ability to coordinate the resources that I have and bring those to bear on an outcome that's going to make my client successful. And, I mean, that's where I guess I see, the secret sauce of my success, but really what that comes down to is all the good people I've worked with and the great clients that I've had and the experiences that those have all brought to me. So,
so you're the orchestra conductor and you don't play the clarinet, but you have the right clarinet player at the right time and you're able to draw them out. And that's a tremendous skill in itself.
Yeah. And, I was almost thinking like, I'm the baker and it's really about the ingredients and, I'm able to, substitute ingredients and bring the right combination of them in, but, it's really the ingredients that makes the bread really good. I don't bake at all. So, I don't know if that's a good analogy or not, but anyways, the real point is it's a team sport, right? And you're only as good as your ingredients or your team or whatever analogy you want to use. So.
Just know that bread rises at different levels based on where you're at in the country, right? If you're up in Denver a mile high, it's going to rise at a different rate than if you're down here in Seattle at sea level. So as you're baking your bread across the country, just keep that in mind.
Life on the farm.
All right.
Does that make Seattle better or worse than Denver? I'm not sure.
It just means it rises at different rates and you got to plan your day for it, right? You got to get up earlier in some parts of the country to leaven the bread.
Now,
all right, what have we got for if you were talking to little buddy, right? Little brother, little sister, what would you tell them to focus on in their cybersecurity dreams?
I mean, I think so. I always, in my role that I'm in, I often get younger people out of school who are coming to me saying, "Hey, security sounds cool. I'd like to do it." What I encourage them to do is really ask themselves what they're actually interested in, what's driving them to do that. And there's lots of areas within security. There's lots of different disciplines. There's technical aspects of security. There's non-technical aspects of security. I would tell them to follow their curiosity. I think the most important thing in being successful in security in the long term and really driving your career is having a good curiosity. And your curiosity might be a technical curiosity. It might be a non-technical curiosity. But I've seen a lot of people try to push themselves into security because it's a good career track or job security or pay or whatever the rationale is. And that's not going to be enough to get you there. So you've got to find something in the realm of security or privacy or whatever you choose to go down that's going to bring you there, because the learning curve is high and the industry moves fast and you're always going to have to learn new things and it's hard to keep up, honestly. So I think the key to that is curiosity and tailor your path, tailor your area of focus to what naturally makes you curious and interested.
Nice.
You can't force yourself into it.
I hope that today's policy episode actually inspires some people to choose policy administration as a career choice, at least at some point in their career. And I hope that we've enabled them to do that because maybe they saw themselves in that role in the future.
Yeah. I mean, again, if you're great at explaining something to people, if you're great at talking to executive audiences, I mean, it might be a really good fit.
If you have the heart of a
consensus.
Yeah.
You got it. All right. So what do you wish you knew? What do you know now that you wish you knew then, right?
Yeah.
What's that one?
Without question, just go Google stuff. Don't let things go from in one ear and out the other. Like the number of meetings I sat in earlier in my career where I'd hear something, there are more experienced people than me around, and I'd hear him say something and it's like, okay, whatever. And, I just let it fly. Like at some point in my career, I realized I should be keeping a list of those things. And after the meeting, going and Googling those things and figuring out what the heck those people were talking about. Right. And there was a turning point in my career when I started doing that in terms of my learning curve and, how quickly I absorbed information and stuff like that. And I wish I knew how valuable that was, earlier on. It took me too long to figure that out, frankly. And I think that's a skill a habit everyone should have.
So I'm going to call you on that one, Torin, because Google was invented in 1998, I believe.
Yeah, but see, I didn't start the practice until 2007 or something, right?
You had to let Google ripen. You couldn't just go use it.
Yeah, right. I had to Metacrawler that a little bit at one point, or Lycos, or
Alta Vista. Alta Vista,
man. Yeah.
Outstanding. So don't let these terms fly past you without taking the opportunity to be curious and look them up. I hear a real theme of curiosity from you, and that's how I've known you as well. And I think that's one of the things that makes you an interesting human being, because you're curious about all the folks that you encounter. So that's pretty cool.
Thanks, Wes.
Thank you for being our guest here today. If I were to close this out, I want to take us to our final thoughts, right? Our key takeaways are that policy is the beginning of security. You can't have a security organization unless you have a security policy that sets the direction and tells you where you're going. And policy administration is more involved than most people think. In fact, I think there's a whole career that can be made out of it. I'm looking forward to next week where we take that policy and we start to apply it to our security strategy and architecture. It's going to be a fun conversation. I hope you come back and join us. Over to you, Kip.
Excellent. Yeah. So let me bring it home for you. Well, if you're still here, congratulations, and we appreciate it.
Yes.
And it means you like what we're doing, which that's just fantastic. Well, if you do like what we're doing here, we've got a free PDF for you. It's a guide. It's called Play to Win, Getting Your Dream Cybersecurity Job. What we've done is we've taken the whole idea of capture the flag, and we've kind of borrowed that and we've turned it into, if you can go do capture the flag, then you can get your dream cybersecurity job by actually using those skills to hunt for your job. Don't just sit around waiting for jobs to roll in your email box. Actually go out there and find them, find an internal champion in the organization that you want to be a part of, right? Build your relationships and get your dream job. It's about 20 pages, super visual. You can see in the slide on right here in the video, there's pages 6 and 7. Anyway, if you want to go grab it, just go to yourcyberpath.com/PDF, yourcyberpath.com/PDF, and let me know what you think of it. If you think it stinks, let me know, then I'll change it, right? Tell me what you think. But that does it. That does it for this episode. You're just one path away from your dream cybersecurity job. Don't forget that, but we'll see you next time.
Thanks all.